To see a full house. My name's Genevieve Taylor. I'm the co-chair of the Guild at the moment. Thanks for coming. Sylvia and Richard are going to introduce our speaker tonight, but just to say that we've got this new Facebook group going. I don't know if any of you are on it, but it's going really well if you use Facebook, and also our Twitter and Instagram if you want to take some pictures and tag us on that. Twitter's @GuildFoodWriter.
Yep.
Yeah, and Instagram is the GFW. So do, you know, if you want to do that, if that's your thing, that would be lovely. Thank you. Nice to see you. And over to Sylvia.
Okay. Well, I'm a recent convertee, I'm afraid, which is really very remiss of me. Richard has been talking for many years about the wonders of the Japanese, and now I found out why. I mean, I spent I don't know, an hour and a bit in Jay's company and learnt more than I would probably in a year of listening to anyone else. I cannot wait for that lottery win, because really, the wonderful pots, let alone knives. I mean, the knives are adoring themselves, and I want every single one of them, including the ones specially commissioned for Jay to create. He does create for chefs, by the way. We have a lot of Westminster Kingsway students here, and you find a need for a knife that nobody's ever thought of, he'd love to hear from you, isn't that right? And he will create it. I mean, I'll let Jay talk a little bit about his venerable history. I was just so overwhelmed, I can't even remember very much. But Richard will know a lot more, because Richard has been a loyal fan for many years.
I've always liked knives, and I've always recognized the value of having a very good knife that was just right for the task, the kitchen task at hand. But I never fully understood how extraordinary knives and knife making could be until I spent, I can't remember how long it was in Jay's company, years.
Yeah, 15 years ago.
15 years ago. And that changed forever my view of knives. And I saw that that each knife is different for the person who is using it, and different for the task that it's being used for. And in Japanese knife making, the variety and the sort of intellectual effort that goes into knife making is unparalleled anywhere in the world, I would say.
Yeah, it is.
And I learned all about that from Jay, and ever since that day I've seen knives and used knives in a different way from the way I had before. The Twitter handle here at the Japanese Knife Company is the Japanese Knife
Japanese Knife CO. Not full company, but short form CO. Okay. Japanese Knife Company.
Just in case you want to tweet about it. And please do, because I think that you're going to have a great time listening to the wonderful Jay Patel.
Thank you. Fundamentally, the design of a kitchen knife hasn't changed in over 15,000 years. Right? A blade and a handle. Trying to reinvent that, we're like trying to reinvent the wheel. It's not going to happen. Right. So over the years, what's happened is we've got more and more shapes for more and more specific reasons. The materials have changed, so they're using higher carbons or more other elements in there to make the blades last longer, to make them easier to sharpen, to make them easier to maintain. And the ergonomics have changed with the introduction of things like, you know, the one-piece handle, or you know, like on the global knives, where you've got a metal handle with a metal blade. You've got blades that are balanced from the further forward, further back. So the ergonomics have changed. But basically, the shape and size of the knives has remained more or less the same for general purpose use. The parameters for buying a knife are, if you have something which is very narrow and very long, it's designed for flesh, so meat or fish. Because both meat and fish require very little pressure to cut, so you want to use the length to stop the cells from breaking. So a long blade, which is very thin. Thin because most meat and fish have fat or oil in them, and it normally creates a vacuum on the side of the blade, so things stick to it. So the narrower the surface area you provide on the contact, the less sticking you'll have. So if you used to use, say for example, a knife this wide to cut a smoked salmon or to slice a smoked salmon, you'd have to go backwards and forwards, and you'll get little ridges as you go along. If you use a single blade, long one, you can use a single strike, so that you get less ridges on the cut. So it gives you a bit more control. The small knife, which a lot of people in the home tend to use as their main knife. It's a little difficult to use for everything, because as you go down, if the blade is so narrow that your knuckles hit the board before the blade edge does, then that part isn't cutting, only this part is cutting. Okay? And normally we want to have the blade so that the whole blade cuts. And you can't do that with a small knife. So the small knives are designed for peeling and paring and working in the hand. So, opposite to this one, which is a long and thin blade for flesh, this is for vegetables. So you've got a very square blade which has got a very flat edge on it, because when you're cutting things like cabbage or squash, you want to try and use as much vertical cut as possible, because if you were to use this knife to cut a squash or something very hard like a Swede, you'd go down there and then you'd have to do this in order for the blade to cut. It's when you do this that something which is round slips in your hand and you cut yourself. So wherever possible, where you're trying to use power to cut something like cabbage, which individual leaves are very soft, but the whole thing put together is very dense and it's quite hard to get through. So you have to use vertical pressure, where a blade which is flat edge on it will cut from there all the way to there. So you don't have to do this in order for it to cut. So for flesh and for vegetables, and something which is wide at the back and narrow at the front, general purpose knife. Whilst in the Japanese methods and the way they make knives, there are something like 270 odd basic shapes of knives. Each one is particular for a job. So for example, this is a knife that I make myself, and this is a kind of 7-inch freshwater eel. And that's all that you will use it for. Okay. But in the kitchen, we are not going, unless you're working in a restaurant or a particular service where all you're doing is one food all day long, and you may want a specific knife for that. In general, 70 to 80% of the work can actually be done on one single blade, which has got a bit, which is wide at the back, so you can do that. You can mince, you can slice, you can chop, you can do everything. So, for example, here, this knife is perfectly happy when it's slicing something. So that's 40 slices, okay, without losing any liquid. It's also good for when you're doing things like carpaccio or sashimi, on that. So you can get very, very fine slices from something. After we've sharpened a couple of knives, I'll show you what a good knife can do and what a bad knife doesn't. Okay. So once you've decided on the shape of the knife, the first thing that a lot of people talk about is the balance of a knife. You know, is the knife balanced? The knife should balance where you hold it. So the balance of the knife depends on, it's no point having a knife that's absolutely perfectly balanced on the bolster there, like that, if I'm going to hold the knife here. If I'm going to hold the knife here, I want the balance to be further back. So don't worry too much about the balance of the knife. First look at how you hold the knife. And always buy a knife after you've actually taken it out of its package, out of its boxes, out of its packaging, actually held it in your hand, and if possible, actually tried it on some food. Only then you can know whether you're buying the right knife for yourself or not. So the balance of the knife depends. If I hold the knife here, like a lot of people do, like you saw quite a lot of chefs hold the knife there, having it balanced, it needs to be balanced here. So for example, this knife will be balanced, it's handmade, so it'll be balanced on the first letter or the first character of the maker's name. That's where the blade will be balanced. Okay, on the first character. Because this knife is a yanagi, but it's designed for cutting sushi and sashimi, where you don't want to hold the blade there. You have to hold the blade like so, so that the handle goes beyond the arm and beyond the hand, so it can't bend. So now my blade, my hand, my arm, everything is in one. I can't move it, so I get very, very clear control and very, very good sort of kind of very, very straight pieces of sashimi. So the balance of the blade depends on how you hold it. Second is the material that the knives are made from. high carbon, or blades that contain a high amount of carbon in them, are the knives that are the easiest to sharpen and that hold the edge the longest. Traditional carbon steels actually oxidize and they rust. Like for example this one, do be careful of the edge because it's very sharp. I'll pass it around and you'll see that the edge on that blade is rusting. If you look at the spine, you'll see where the hard high carbon core is in the blade itself. So do be careful of the edge, it is very sharp. And as you put more and more carbon into steel,
this one got black.
The steel itself, if you remember, it's an alloy. It's a number of elements put together. If you take carbon,
you get this,
and you take iron,
and you can see here,
that's
this
steel.
is the spine of the blade.
If you just leave it like
this one is
iron and carbon, then what will happen is that the blade will be very, very brittle. It will break very quickly. It's like when you see the guys in a circus, you know, they have a metal rod and they put it along and bend it and it breaks. I'd like to see somebody trying that with something apart from an iron and a carbon, because iron and carbon is very brittle. Even the tiniest amount of pressure will make it break. So you have to add other things into that steel in order to make it not so brittle. Otherwise it would chip, it would break, and it just wouldn't be practical as a knife for using in the kitchen. So they add other elements in there, and these are the elements that you add in there can make the knife either harder to sharpen or less hard to sharpen. And also because carbon steel rusts very quickly, and there is in modern thinking, you know, we don't want things that rust in the kitchen. They add in chromium, which is the cheapest way of making a blade stainless. But chromium is a very, very sticky element. All the molecules kind of stick together very hard. So when you try to remove them from the side of the blade, they go in either chunks or they bend the steel out. So we're looking for elements that kind of stick like that, so that when you remove a bit from the side, the other bit stays on the blade. Rather than going into a big chemistry lesson now, just to say that if you go into a store where they know what they're selling, they will be able to tell you what the element content of the blade is. So always look for something which is low carbon, high carbon, low chromium, and other elements that will make the blade stainless. So you could use molybdenum, vanadium, nickel, any of those elements. Having said that, like everything in life, there is an exception to the rule. And that is what the modern steels, they're called powder steels. Powder steels, the European standard for a high carbon blade, to be able to call it high carbon, is 0.6% carbon. If you have 0.6% carbon in a blade, you're allowed to call it high carbon. This blade here is a powder steel. This has just over 3.2% of carbon in it. At 3.2% of carbon, the blade will literally crumble as you hit something with it. And so to stop it from crumbling, they add in their chromium, which, as I said before, is not a great element for putting into the blades, but it's metal powder metallurgy, where they take the elements in a very, very fine, it's actually finer than talc, right, the powder, and they put it into the steel, when they make the steel, so you don't get clustering of the elements, and so the knife is easier to sharpen. So that's the only exception with powder steels. They're becoming more and more popular now, and you can see them. At the moment, I would say that a Sentoku knife, which is this size and shape, is probably the most popular blade in the most domestic kitchens. You're looking at probably something around 120 to 150 pounds for an entry-level powder steel blade, and probably around 300 pounds or so for a really good one. And you could go up to several thousand pounds if you wanted to. So that's a little bit about the elements. Now about the structure of the blades themselves. If you imagine that as the blade gets thinner and thinner, it's getting sharper and sharper. As it's getting thinner and thinner and sharper, the blade's also becoming weaker. So what happens is that as you go down onto the surface of your, and it's not the food so much as the board, actually that's actually doing the harm, the blade will, at a molecular level, be either doing that, or if you hold the blade like most people do, because as a human, when we stand with the hands to our side like that, we don't stand with the hands like this. Okay? Naturally we stand like this. If you try and hold a blade vertical, it hurts here. Okay? So most people will hold the blade at a slight angle inwards because it's more comfortable. Now if I hold the blade this way, and my blade arrives at the surface, it's going to bend in that direction. Okay? So the harder the steel gets, to stop it from bending, the less memory the steel itself has. Right, so if something, in metallurgy they call it metal memory. So if you have something which is a soft steel, it has lots of memory. So that when something bends, it goes back, it remembers where it was and it goes back to where it was, flexibility. As the steel gets harder and harder, it doesn't remember, so it stays over the edge. Okay? And that's what causes bluntness in the first instance. In order to make a knife that's going to be easy to sharpen, if the whole blade was made out of the same hard steel, when you try and grind it, you're trying to grind very hard steel by hand on a stone, and it's not going to be easy. Which is why German knives and most European knives, and what a lot of people buy, a lot of Brazilian knives now, and Spanish knives, tend to be hard to sharpen. When you get it first, it's really beautiful and sharp, but you can never get that edge back again, because the whole blade is so thick and so dense that trying to grind by hand is virtually impossible. You need to put it onto grinding machines. When people bring those knives into our stores to sharpen, we normally always put them onto some kind of grinding machine first to establish an edge and then polish the edge of stones. What the Japanese do is, if you look at that blade that you've got there, which you saw, it's made out of something called warakomi. Warakomi is a Japanese term for sandwiching something. So they sandwich a layer of very hard steel with layers of soft steel on the outside. So when I rub it against something abrasive, I remove soft steel, which goes away really easily, and then the hard steel comes out from inside like a pencil in reverse. So what you're actually sharpening is a very, very, very thin layer of hard steel, and the rest of it is soft steel. The soft steel also acts as a little bit of cushioning and gives it a bit more spring and allows this, protects a very, very hard central core from breaking and chipping. So always look for a blade, if possible, that has got 3 layers or more of steel. The more layers you put on, and at the moment Damascus blades are becoming very, very popular. Damascus blades are things that have lots and lots of layers on them. The more layers you put on, the thinner and thinner the central core is getting. And as the central core gets thinner and thinner, it becomes easier and easier to sharpen. But if I'm very good at sharpening, you don't need to go to that level, because a single layer of steel will hold the edge far longer because it's thicker as a whole piece than the Damascus. But the Damascus is going to be easier to sharpen. So it's always a compromise between something which is easy to sharpen and something which stays sharp very long. Then how the knife has actually been made. So the bulk of the knives that we buy today are what they call stamped steel. They take a piece of steel and a die comes down or a laser comes along and cuts the blade exactly the same shape and size as the finished knife. That means that the steel crystals in the piece of steel are where they were naturally there when the steel was made. The blade is then heated up, cooled down so that it gets hard, and then they grind the sides, put a handle on it, and it's your finished knife. Most of the work in that sort of case will be done by a machine and not by hand. Then there's the other handmade knife or other forged knives, and those are normally what they call rolled. So you take a piece of steel, you cut a blade about half the size of the finished knife, and it's about twice the thickness. You heat it up and you put it through a couple of rollers like pasta, and you squeeze it out to the shape that you want. What you've done there is you've put the steel crystals and you put them closer and closer and closer together. And so the blade becomes denser, it becomes more enduring in its edge, and generally will make it slightly harder to sharpen than something which has a steel crystal a bit further away. And then finally you've got completely handmade knives, which are actually taken from a small billet of steel. You heat it up and you beat it out to the shape that you want, where you've not only compressed the steel crystals close together, but by nature steel has lots and lots of impurities in it. When you dig the coal out of the ground, it's not pure because it's been down there for 300 million years or more, and other elements have joined up and reacted with it. So you might have phosphorus there, you might have other elements there which you don't, magnesium. Magnesium is not too bad for the plate, it makes it hard wearing, but other materials that you don't want in the steel. Now those elements, if you use a rolling method or something which applies the pressure straight vertically down on it, would push that together. If that was an impurity there, it would just get squeezed further and further and further into the blade. You could never remove it. When you beat something by hand, you don't just beat straight down, but you beat across like that. So you take the two steel crystals, you lock them together, and the impurity is knocked out. It's what you see the sparks coming out when you see a blacksmith hitting something, and the sparks that are coming out are all the impurities being knocked out of the steel.
Are those the knives you see like sort of swirly?
Swirly patterns on them?
Yeah.
The swirly patterns are just there from the layers of steel. So you could
not
get
just the swirls, but like the little.
The dimples. The dimples are normally it's called a tsuchime, and that's normally there so that the hammering is left on the blade, so that when you cut something with a lot of fat, oil, or starch in it, it doesn't create a vacuum on the side of the blade, and so it's easier to stick. The problem is that now, because that's become very, very popular, the tsuchime has become very, very popular. Lots and lots of knife manufacturers have got dies with those hammer marks on it, and just press it straight down. Does it have any effect on it? I don't think it does, actually, because that final hammering, if the knife was actually made by hand up to that point, and then you just put the hammering pattern on afterwards, it would make a difference. But if you were pretending that your knife was hand hammered because of that patterning, then it does make a difference, because you might have a rolled knife which has got a hammering on it, which will be the same quality.
So like a manufacturer like Kai, they
machine.
Have that's machine. So even those dimples are machine.
Or Kai. Kai doesn't actually make the knives themselves. Kai has 14 factories in Japan. The Michel Bras knives are made in their own factory. There's a couple of Sekimagoroku is made by them. But the main Kai collections, which are the Kai Classic, the new ones, you know, all the hammering on it, they're all made by a company called Ono Cutlery, who actually also manufactures for other people. So if you buy a Kai Classic, it's an identical knife to the Kasumi. It's the same steel, it's the same manufacturing, it's the same thing. But Kai is a bigger brand, so you're probably paying 30% more money for the Kai knife, because the packaging is much nicer, the marketing is a lot better, and so you're paying 30% more money for the Kai knife to the Kasumi knife, which is actually exactly the same knife.
But the dimples on it aren't hand hammered.
No, they're not hand hammered.
Just molds.
They're not hammered. Yeah, they're. And when they say that they're handmade, some of their knives, they're not being hand hammered. They've been rolled by hand. Okay, so there's also a big question about what is handmade and what is not handmade. I mean, if I actually take a blade out of the heat and put it into two rollers by hand, is that a handmade knife, or is it only handmade if I take it and actually beat it? Because a genuinely hand-beaten knife is unlikely that you're going to find anything under 300, maybe 400 pounds. In generally, you're looking at somewhere between sort of 500 to 800 pounds, going up to, I think in the store, what's the Nesmux? They're about 4,000.
Oh yeah, 4,000.
Yeah, about 4,000, 5,000 pounds. So and why are you buying something which is 300 pounds to which is something which is 4,000 pounds? One, it could be the amount of beating that the blade's taken. So that if you've beaten it a lot to start with something which is, say, 4 mil thick, and you've got it down to 1.3 mil thickness or 1.4 mil thickness by beating, you'd have got the steel crystals so close together that the knife is very, very unlikely to go dull very quickly. Like, for example, this knife here, I was just saying, Richard, that I've had this knife for, I don't know, more than 20 years, 30 years. And even today, after that length of time, it will cut like that. I sharpen it probably, I don't use it a lot nowadays, but say that in a domestic house you probably sharpen this knife once or twice a year to keep that kind of edge on it. But that's why this knife will be like 1,600, maybe 1,700 pounds. So, whereas this one, which is my favorite knife at the moment, is about 160 pounds, 170 pounds. I think it's 174 pounds for a Sentoku in this particular blade. And it's just beautifully sharpened. It's very, very easy to sharpen because it's got this carbon core in it.
Will that knife rust?
Only at the edge, as you saw there.
Okay.
Okay, because if you look at the core material, which is in the middle, right, that's high carbon steel. It's called Ayagami. It's a blue steel, which has a little bit of chrome to stop it rusting very quickly. But this outside layer is stainless. So as you can see, it's rusting on the end there. but it doesn't rust on the other side of the blade.
Can I ask a really stupid question? So you should get rid of the rust before you slice your food, or not? How does it?
Not really. Any brown rust, yes.
Right.
If you've got brown rust on the side, you should. But if it's black, like an old-fashioned sabatier that you might have in the kitchen for 30, 40 years, and it's all got patina on it, no, it doesn't do anything. If you cut something like a red onion with a very high carbon blade, like a white steel, without any antioxidant agents inside it, you'll see it actually changing color as you cut it. The only way to stop something from rusting completely or having any effect on food whatsoever is use ceramic. Ceramic knives are a fantastic addition to any kitchen if you buy the right one. Unfortunately, the ceramic was originally invented by a company called Kyoto Ceramics, to make the tiles on the outside of the space shuttle. That's where it's from. It's just a byproduct of that technology. With a ceramic blade, because, as I said, what happens with a steel blade is that it flexes. No matter how hard the steel, it does flex a little bit. And that's what makes it go blunt in the first instance. With a ceramic, it's not flexible at all. So it only wears out as the blade wears out. So it can take between 5 and 8 years for the blade to go dull. And it can be resharpened if you've got the right ceramic. But Kyocera's patent finished on that material about 12 years ago. And so now there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Chinese copies of these blades coming in, which are the first generation ceramic. And you go into a shop and you see a white blade with ceramic with a black handle on it, and you think, well, it's ceramic. It's first generation ceramic. It's absolute rubbish. You can't sharpen them, they break really easily, they don't keep their edge, they can never get them sharp in the first place, really, like a traditional Japanese ceramic blade from Kyocera. Kyocera is now into its 6th generation blade, which is slightly flexible, so they don't break so quickly. But they're only flexible laterally, they're not flexible this way, only that way. So they still keep their edges, but they're really good blades. But the main advantage of a ceramic blade is that if you cut something which is pungent, like onion or garlic, normally you would have to wipe the blade really clean with the hot water and a scrubber before you go to cut an absorbent flavor, like say a cake or cheese or avocado, which absorb flavors really quickly. With a ceramic knife, you just wipe it and it's all gone. So it maintains the purity of the smell. When you cut any food, especially, well, not any food, but when you're cutting vegetables, quite a lot of the vegetables have acidity in them. The steel reacts with the acid. Now, the more nickel it's got on it, the less it will react, but nonetheless, the carbon radicals going off there onto the food are going to react. And so, as they react, it changes the flavor. And normally you can't tell because either the acidity is so strong, like in a lemon, that all you taste is the acidity, or the reaction is so small that you can't taste that reaction. But if you have a food with a lot of acid, as well as a lot of sugar, strawberries, kiwis, mangoes, are quite high in acidity, quite high in sugar. The sugar knocks the acid flavors down, and then you can taste the metal reaction. So sometimes if you eat a strawberry or something, and you can feel like you're eating a bit of chewing paper on the back of your mouth, it's normally the reaction from the blade. So ceramic won't do that because it's completely inert, so there's no reaction. So it maintains the purity of the flavor. And finally, any carbon radicals coming off the blade onto the food are oxidizing on the food, and that's what's changing the color. So if I cut an apple with a white steel blade, it will go black as I'm cutting it. If I do it with a powder steel blade, it'll probably take maybe 2 or 3 hours for it to start going discoloring. With a ceramic knife, if you cut an apple today and you leave it overnight, it'll still be the same color tomorrow morning as it was when you cut it the night before. There's no carbon radicals going onto the food. The only time you get any discoloration is on things like avocado, where you've got natural bits of iron in little clusters, which actually oxidize, and so you'll get little spots of brown rather than the whole brown side. So a ceramic knife is really for people who are looking for absolute purity of the food that they're cutting. But it's a delicate knife, so if I were to drop it onto a stone floor, the chances are I'll chip it or break it. Most of the breaks and chips can be repaired, but if it broke here, nothing we can do about it. If it broke here, we could make it into a smaller knife. And we do all that kind of work in the store. So if you ever buy a knife and you bring it in, we can do all the repair work in the store.
Have you got a ceramic knife there?
I haven't brought one because my wife won't let her ceramic knife get out of the house. I didn't go to the shop before I came out. She's absolutely protective of her ceramic blade. So I didn't bring one with me today. But they're literally just white blades with black handles on them. But it's very important that you look for the brand Kyocera. They're the only ones that there's another brand called Forever, which are the two main ceramic producers in Japan, who still make very, very high quality ceramic blades. A small knife like this you can buy with a plastic handle for 50, 50 pounds.
When did they start appearing then, ceramic knives? Because I only became aware of them a few years ago.
When I first started my company in 1998, that was the first knives that we started selling. And they've been in Japan for about 10 years before then.
So the Japanese invented?
They invented them, the Kyocera, Kyoto Ceramics, at the behest of NASA, made, because they're the world leaders in ceramic technology, they made the ceramic tiles for the outside of the space shuttle. This is one of the byproducts. Like they also make ballpoint pens with the ball made out of a ceramic, so it doesn't stick to anything because it's non-adherent. They make all sorts of other stuff out of it, which are all commercial applications of that technology. So yes, the original one is from Kyocera.
They do break then, like
yeah, they do break if you drop them.
Right.
If you try and twist with them, you can break it. But the new ones are slightly more flexible than they used to be, so they're less likely to, but they are still brittle. And that brittleness is the reason why they stay sharp so long, because they don't wear. So it's a compromise between one and the other, like everything. Okay, so now onto the sharpening. So if I have a knife, a sharp blade, and I find that when I apply it onto the food and without any pressure, it takes from here, it's taking roughly 5-6 inches for it to cut. All I've done there is I've bent the blade slightly one way. So what I'm going to do is, normally I would actually use a newspaper, but we forgot to bring one. So you put that onto the edge of the, you put the blade down on its edge, you lift it up the same as the bevel, in this particular case like a pound coin at the end there, and just stroke it back. What I'm doing is what a barber would have done to his cut thread razor on a leather strop. Something which was bent over this way, I'm putting it onto a flat surface and I'm just straightening it up. I'm not losing any metal, I'm just straightening up the edge. If you take your knife and you do that on the edge very softly, and you can feel like a hair stuck to it, it means the blade's been bent in that direction, so you're feeling a little bit of the burr. And you can just straighten that burr out. So in a commercial kitchen, we normally recommend chefs to do this in between every service, so that it just brings the blade back without having to put it onto a steel or any kind of sharpening like that. So on both sides. And it's very important that you do this and not that. Because if you go like this, you'll bend the edge more. So you've got to keep it straight. Now, the blade is cutting almost straight away. It's not taking this long ride before it cuts. It's cutting almost straight away. So, that's just for maintenance. If you've used the blade a lot, and depending on the kind of steel you've got, whether it needs sharpening once every week, or once every month, or once every year, depending on the kind of steel, nonetheless, every kind of knife needs sharpening at some point, because the blade isn't just doing that, but it's actually wearing out. If the blade has gone round at its edge, then you're going to need to grind two new flat surfaces. So this knife, I don't know if some of you saw me rubbing it onto a stone before. All I was doing was with a sharpener. I didn't have any dull knives, so I was just blunting it out by just literally grinding it flat. So now this blade is completely flat. It's not going to cut anything. If I put it on here, it's actually not going to cut anything at all. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to establish two new angles on the sides of the blade. So here's quite a rough stone. It's what we call a grinding stone. It has 220 particles of cutting material per square inch, and so it's quite rough. I'm putting the blade onto the surface, facing 11 o'clock. I'm lifting it up, the same as a pound coin an inch away from there. And I'm just going to go I've now got a slight roughness on this side. If you do that, then you do that, you'll find one side is slightly rougher than the other. Okay? If you want to pass this around, if you just put your thumb very softly across like that and then this way, you'll find the left side of the blade, because I've ground this to the right side, the left side of the blade has got a little burr on it. What's happened is that the blade has been ground so to the point of where it can't be ground anymore, and it's bending over by me pressing down. So the blade is ready to turn over. The blade is not ready to turn over to the other side, so I can feel that roughness on one side of the blade. Whilst you're having a look at that, I'm just going to polish this one off because I don't like this has got 6,000 grits, so it's very fine.
Could you explain about grits?
Yeah, I'm going to do that. So the grits are silicon carbide made into tiny little particles which are embedded into ceramic. So something which has 220 grits in it will be rougher than something which has 6,000, because 6,000 all the grits are closer together because they're smaller. It's much like using a file, a nail file. You have a rough side, you have a smooth side. So that's the same with the stones. But like everything, there are different qualities of the silicon carbide crystals that or the particles you put in. So you can buy the most standard stone for sharpening is 1,000 grits, which is this here. But you can buy a 1,000 grit stone for £20. You can buy one for £60. You can buy one for £100. They're all 1,000 grits. But when you buy a stone and people kind of just look at the number, it's a little bit like looking at a car and saying, I bought a 2-litre car. You could have bought a 2-litre Ford, you could have bought a 2-litre Ferrari. They're both 2 litres, but they're both very different animals. So with the grits, if the grit has got a sort of like a round bit at the top and a ball at the bottom, it's what's called a nipple nodule. When you actually put it into the base of the ceramic base, because there's a ball at the bottom of it, it just lines itself up very easily, but it's not very sharp at the top. If you have one which is like a cone, it's harder to align all the stones, so it's a bit more expensive, but it cuts steel faster. And if you have something called a shard, it cuts steel really quickly, and it's very hard to realign all those very sharp nodules like that, and so it's a bit more expensive. It depends on the kind of knife you're trying to sharpen and the hardness of the blade. Because it's a bit more complicated than just saying, oh, I'll buy a 1,000 grit stone. The best way to buy a stone is to go into someone who actually knows what the difference between the stones is, and actually can look at your knife and say, yeah, this is a 56 Rockwell blade, so you can do it on this kind of stone or not. Otherwise, any stone will sharpen anything, but a very, very smooth stone, like a cheaper stone, if you were trying to sharpen something very hard, like that end blade there, it would take a lot of work. I mean, on this knife here, that's going around, I spent 8 and then a further 8, so 16 strokes to get it to create the curve. If I did the same thing on this one here, it would probably, on that particular stone, it would probably take me 50 or 60 instead of 16.
Do you like the stones that you soak overnight the best? Or
You don't need to soak anything overnight. Okay, you need to soak something so that when you actually take it out and you put the water on it, it sits on the surface. So it could be anything from 15 minutes to half an hour. And yes, most stones, and the higher the grit is, the less they need soaking, because the material is much more dense, and so the water won't go in anyway. And the ceramic stones don't need soaking at all. They're what they call splash and go. So this side of this stone is what we call splash and go. You don't need to soak this side. If I were to soak this for a long time, it would crumble.
Okay.
Okay, so you'll actually damage the stone by soaking it for a long period of time.
So which side do you use?
You start off. Yeah, normally you will start off with this side for a blunt blade. I'm going to do that on this next knife when I'm going down. I've done it on 220 to create the edge. But if you imagine that at 220 grits, the actual edge itself has probably got 220 lines per inch. So it feels a little serrated. If I were to cut an onion with it, you'd cry, because you'll tear the cells and you'll hear it. Whereas if I were to sharpen that on 1,000, you would be less likely to hear it. And then if I sharpen it on a 6,000, you get a very polished finish. So whilst the angle is the same, the side is either rough or smooth. So if it's smooth, you're not creating any friction. Right? And so it feels like it's sharper and it cuts cleaner because it's not actually resisting against the... So yes, to sharpen it, you can sharpen it on a 220 or 120, but then you need to take it onto a finer grit just to get a polished edge rather than a rough edge.
Jay, many home cooks are very resistant to the use of stones.
There is an alternative.
Yeah, what's the...
Water wheels.
There
the water wheels.
The water wheel, yeah.
There is a water wheel sharpener that I think that there's 2 or 3 companies that make it. Global make one. We have one. But there's only one manufacturer of those wheels in Japan, and so basically they're all the same. There's just different looks on them and different branding on them. The water wheel is exactly the same material as this what I'm using here. There's one which has this on it, and one which has this on it. The 2 little wheels with 2 bevels on it, and they're sort of slightly off at an angle. When you put the blade in with water in it, and you go backwards and forwards, you get the exact angle that you need without having to do anything. So they're actually foolproof. You can get a very, very good, acceptable edge on it, but it's not the same as doing it by hand. Now, doing it by hand on a stone, the technique, as you can see, is very simple. When I do this knife in a minute, you'll see it's literally putting the blade on there and going backwards and forwards. But it's a muscle memory thing, so it's a manual dexterity skill, so it needs muscle memory, so you need to do it a lot to get the memory in the muscle so that you do the same angle each time. So if you're the kind of person that's going to take on something and are going to persevere with it till you get it right, then the stone is the best way. But if you're the kind of person that buys something, does it 5, 6 times, gets bored because it doesn't work very well, and puts it away under the table, then that's not for you. Then the wheel is much better.
Can you ruin a knife by doing it the wrong way?
You can make it worse than it was, but you can't do anything to it that can't be undone.
Okay, there's always an answer.
Yeah, I mean, unless you actually either bend the blade and create a microfracture in the blade, or you actually chip it really deep, like that, by trying to chop a duck bone or something. There's very little that you can do to your knife that we can't undo. You know, so if you break a tip, we'll make it into a smaller knife. If you get a big chip on it, we'll make it into a narrower knife. If you bend it, we'll straighten it. We can't replace handles really. Or riveted handles are very hard to replace because by the time you've done that, you might as well put a new knife. It's a quite expensive process. But even with a riveted knife, if it's something that you treasure, like maybe something that's passed down the family for a long time, that can be done.
I bought one of your ceramic sword type sharpening steels, which I use regularly.
The steel is also a great way of sharpening. In a Western kitchen, whilst the Japanese always say don't use a steel, they always use a stone, use a stone, use a stone. They don't work in a Western kitchen. It's a very different way of working. If I'm working on a service in a kitchen and I said to my chef that I'm just going to go and sharpen my knife in the middle of the service, I'll probably get whacked around the head with a... So we need to use the steel in a Western kitchen in conjunction with a stone. And when we're using the steel, a lot of people kind of do this really fast method. I'm just going to use this and pretend it's a steel. So a lot of people will do this. It's so inaccurate. It's so I mean, sometimes you're having this angle, sometimes you're having that angle, sometimes you're starting the blade there, sometimes you're finishing here. The way to do it is to take one side of the blade, put the steel on the surface, get the angle that you want, like a pound coin at the end, and just literally take it back. Ceramic steels have alumina inside them, way harder than any steel. Diamond steels obviously are even harder, and so they will cut steel like butter all day long. You don't need to use pressure, so just gentle. Normally 5 strokes. Yeah, it gives you a sharp edge. Doesn't need much. And a lot of people say, do I go this way or do I go that way? Okay. Imagine that this is my steel and this is my knife. If I go this way, I don't cut my finger. If I go this way, I cut my finger. If this is stronger than this, when I go backwards, I'm not cutting much steel. When I go forward, I'm cutting more steel. This is less aggressive than that. So if I'm just trying to do a very gentle hone, I go backwards. If I'm trying to do a little bit more, I go forward. The steels with the grooves inside them, like the old-fashioned grooves, we call them butcher steels because they're great for a butcher because they leave a very raw edge like a rough stone. So a butcher needs a raw edge because they're going through tendon, sinew, tissue, muscle, all sorts of stuff. And if you were to try and cut a sinew, for example, with a very, very, very fine, smooth blade, it would just slide over the top, it won't cut. You need something to grip into it. So for a butcher, the steel with little grooves in it is fine. But for home use, you either want a diamond or a ceramic.
And would you always recommend getting a stone which has the rough side and the smooth side, or like recently I bought one that was like in the middle where it didn't have one or the other. It was like
you can. 1,000 grits is in the middle. Actually, the rougher side normally wears faster, and so after a while you find that if you don't flatten the blade out, sewn out regularly, you'll start waving, and also you'll use up the rough side before you use up the smooth side. So if the budget allows, yes, you can use both. But if you think that a stone like this is going to do at least 1,000 plus sharpenings, and if you're sharpening once in a month, that's 1,000 months. Right? It's many, many years, so I wouldn't worry too much. But if the budget allows, then I would actually buy separate stones. There's my smooth stone. There's my rough stone. I also have 1,000 volts Olympics, like I've had a long one here with me. So, yeah, normally I would use different stones because I use a lot of them. And I normally take it through, my very fine blades like this one, they would go through what's called takadashi sharpening. They would go through 8 stones to get to the final finish. So that the blade actually cuts. The tomato almost sort of slices itself off as you see it coming towards it, so it's very, very, very sharp. So this one, I'm just going to finish this one off polishing. When I get no, I know it's done. That's that. So this one, which we've done on this side, so that we've got that burr on this side. We're now going to remove the burr. Now I did 16 on this side to get the burr. If I do the same 16 on this side, it's just going to go back the other way. So I'm only going to do 60% of the work. So I'm going to do 10. This time I can't start there because the handle's going to come in the way. I'm going to start here and I'm going to work my way to 11. So 9 o'clock. Now it's cutting, or wasn't cutting before, but I can feel that it's quite rough. it feels like it's tearing a little bit, like I'm using a saw. So I'm just going to.
How many stones would you say you need in the kitchen?
2.
Just 2. One
Most
rough,
kitchens.
One.
Yeah. I mean, you should never get to the stage where you need this stone.
Yeah.
You should always have your knife in a condition where you just can do it on there. About once every year or 2 years, you need to get it onto that stone there. You can bring it to the store and just get somebody to do it for you, because otherwise you can keep. I mean, if you're using like a lot of knives like Victorinox or Tramontina or any of those cheaper sort of brands, then probably use really rough stone as well, because otherwise you'll be sharpening for a long time on the 1000.
Are the stones actually man-made stones? They're not hewed out of a rock?
There are. They're natural toshi. The natural toshi don't have numbers on them, and they're normally for fine finishing. They're running out of those stones more and more. They're having to go deeper and deeper underground and further out into the sea. Basically what happens is this volcanic activity. Volcanic ash comes up and it floats out into the sea. The further away it goes, the smaller the particles were. 200 million, 300 million years later, those have now become into a compact stone. So they dig down about 1 kilometer, 1.5 kilometers into the ground, and they go 3 or 4 kilometers out into the sea. And those stones can't be dug out by machine because they're very, very brittle. So they need to put chisels in and then prise them over. So a stone like this, what are those middle toshis? They start at?
It's about 350 pounds.
So they start around 350 pounds. I think most expensive ones are about 900.
No, 1200.
1200.
Like slate.
It's exactly like slate, but it's volcanic ash that's been compacted down. So we've got natural stones that go from 300 to about 1200 pounds in the store. But they're really for what we call knife nerds. We're probably sharpening more sports knives and hunting knives and camping knives than people who do kitchen knives. And they're used a lot by people who use chisels and other tools where they need a very fine, especially for hardwood. So here we've got a 1000 grit.
You said earlier it's often the chopping surface that ruins the blade. What chopping surface would you recommend that doesn't ruin the blade?
Okay, so for a professional kitchen where you're making something which is going to be sold onto a place which is going to resell it, like you were making sandwiches for a store or something, it needs to be plastic of some kind. The best is made by a company called Hasegawa. It's Asahi rubber. It's almost like a feather. So when you cut it and you stroke it, it kind of sticks back together again, so it doesn't affect the fruit. It's very soft. It's really good. And there are 2 qualities of it. One which is a solid plain, and the other one which is a solid one with a piece of wood in the middle to stop from bending, and then another piece on the other side. They're the best of the commercial boards. For wood,
Do they last quite long?
they are for restaurants, so yeah, they're fine for long.
What was the name again?
Hasegawa.
Hasegawa.
Hasegawa chopping boards. They're Asahi rubber. And the wood.
What's the cost of that?
It's about 50-60 pounds.
For a small one like that.
15 or
50.
50 pounds.
And they go up to about 200 pounds for very big ones for the restaurants.
Is there any sort of like surface you say like just to stay away from with any?
Yeah, glass marble. Immediately blunts your knife, no matter how good a knife I've got. When the knife edge arrives at the surface, it wants to go somewhere. If it can't go anywhere, it'll just go back on itself. You'll blunt it the first time you use it. You'll also chip the blades, you'll damage the blades. Glass and marble are the worst things for knives.
Plastic is okay.
Yeah, the white plastic's fine.
Yeah.
Would you say wood is better though, or is it?
Well, it's different.
Yeah, just different.
Yeah, I think that if I'm going to use wood, then Paulonia is the best. Paulonia almost feels like balsa wood. When I pick this up with a Paulonia board, you won't even feel it in your hands. But it's very hardy. It's what we call in England the handkerchief tree. Very rare. We have ones that grow in Uji, which are the mountains outside of Kyoto, when we get ours from there. We get long boards that we cut into the size.
Are they very expensive?
They're about £60 for a board that size. The next one after that is hinoki, Japanese cypress. Hinoki is very good as well. After that is bamboo, which is quite inexpensive, but always by the side grain of, not the end grain, but the side grain. The end grain is very hard. The side grain will allow the blade to go in somewhere, so they're better than the end grain. Then maple, beech. The things to avoid are things like oak, iroko, anything which has a mineral inside it, because they're like little stones inside the wood, and they'll just blend the knives very quickly. Olive.
You haven't said anything at all about power-driven rotary stones. Do you see them as having any use on a dull, like this knife that becomes so totally dull that it has to be
as I said, we use them for when people bring us German or very hard to sharpen knives. We always use a power. Rather than using a rotary stone, we tend to use belts. And we have a 72 by 2-inch belt that goes around like a knife maker's belt. And we use that for also when we're, remember that the blade edge is very thin. Over the years, as you come down, the blade edge is getting thicker and thicker. So no matter how much you sharpen it, it's always going to feel like it's wedging something. At that point, maybe normally between 8 and 10 years, the whole blade needs to be thinned. And if we were going to try and thin the whole blade by stone, it would take so long, it would be uneconomical. Yeah. So we use a belt siler to actually to thin the blade down and we polish it. So yes, there is a case for power tools. The thing with power tools, you don't have much control, because you can't just suddenly stop it. You know, you can overdo it something. Yeah. Also, the blade can go, you can get a discoloration of the blade, which means that you're losing the temper. So normally the blades are heated to like 800 degrees and then cool down. Now, if I take it to 500, I'll end up with a softer blade.
And you can wear it down to the point where there's no blade left.
Very quickly.
Sort of almost a philosophical question. I mean, somebody really, you know, they bring in a knife and it's not really probably a very great knife and it needs the power tooling and all the rest of it, and okay, so they're prepared to pay the price. But would you think in many instances that was a waste of effort? I mean, at what stage is a knife not worth saving, or does it depend on the user?
A knife is always worth saving.
No.
Yeah, it's a good knife, it's always worth saving. If it's something you enjoy using.
Right.
But if the knife costs £20 and you're going to pay £8 to sharpen it, is it worth it? Probably not. If I buy an IKEA knife, like we get sometimes people come in with IKEA knives, because they bought a block of 6 knives for $9.99. They want it sharpened, right? And you think, well, it's going to cost you £7 to sharpen this one knife, or we charge £1 per inch of blade to sharpen. Okay, so it's going to cost you £6–7 to sharpen it. Is it worth it? Well, somebody thinks, yes, it is worth it because I like that knife. I don't want to go all the way to the store to buy another one, so I'll pay the £6. But to me, it's not worth it. But if I've got a £50–60 knife that I've enjoyed using for the last 15 years, then it's like a fountain pen. You know, when you use it, it wears to your hand. You know, and it's not just replacing it with a new one. I actually want my old one, but I want my old one sharpened. Because it's worn to my hand, the handle fits right in my hand, the edge feels right because I've been using a particular angle. So I want my knife, I don't want a new one.
You probably want to talk about something else, but at some stage I'm intrigued by this whole handle business. I mean, is it, I know there are some, I think, phenomenally expensive material handles and some that are maybe not, and so then there are handmade handles. Is it just a matter of personal preference?
Absolutely.
It is.
It's how you hold a knife and what feels comfortable in your hand. Like some people find this kind of traditional Japanese D-shaped handle really uncomfortable. Some people insist on it. Some people find that they need a thinner handle, like that. Some people want a bigger handle because they've got a bigger hand, it's fatter. It's so personal, and that's why you need to go in and actually hold the knife in your hand and see before you buy it. Buying it in a packet, hanging up on a wall, you know, and then taking it home and paying £100 for something, and you take it home, and then because you've taken it out of a packet, when you take it back, oh no, we can't change it because you've taken it out of this packet. Well, how am I supposed to hold a tool unless I've used it first? I mean, I've bought the number of drills that I've bought over the years, and I take them home and it just doesn't do the job that I want it to do because it either runs out of power really quickly, or I need to be able to try it in the store and actually see how it feels before I buy it. So now I don't buy any tools without actually trying them. So in the UK we can't, but in France they have stores where you can actually try all the tools out before you buy them. So I always buy my tools in France now. I don't buy them here.
Is that the norm in Japan as well?
Yeah.
You'd be expecting.
Yeah, they, wherever you go, in every store, they have all the goods, and then they have a big table in front with all one model of everything out, with all kinds of materials there you can try. And they have somebody there who can show you how to use it, what to do with it. Even if it's only a £20 item, they'll still show you how to use it. Yeah, because it's a tool. It's not a piece of art that I'm going to hang up on my wall. You know, yes, I wanted to. I mean, in a professional kitchen, first you're looking for the sharpness and the endurance of the sharpness. Then you're looking for the ease of maintenance on the blade, and then you're looking for the aesthetics. In a domestic kitchen, you're looking for ease of sharpness first, then probably the aesthetics, and then the endurance, because you don't use the knife as much. And so people kind of wanted to match the kitchen or whatever. But aesthetics should never come first when you're buying a tool. It should always be functionality. The functionality should always be first. You know, then the ergonomics, and then maybe the aesthetics. But it just depends.
You wouldn't expect a musician to buy an instrument without playing it.
No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. But we've got so used to the idea that we have to buy these things without trying them that we just do it. And we're buying off somebody else's experience. So young chefs will go into a kitchen, they'll see the head chef using something, or they'll see one of their idols using something, and will buy that brand and that knife because they've seen somebody else using it. When that's crazy. I mean, you should buy it for your own hands, not for somebody else's hands. But people do. We've got so used to the idea. You know, it's madness. Right. So. That's the sharpening. Just so that you know that any members of the guild, if they want, we run classes on Saturday evenings. We normally only have 4 people at a time because it's a one-to-one thing. But if you book in, you won't have to pay any money to do a class, a sharpening class. So do take advantage. You know, you've got the number there. Just phone it through and say that you're a member of the guild and that you want to do a sharpening class. And somebody will do a proper class with you, one-to-one, for about an hour and a half. Okay, okay, so. Sorry? Baker Street is Saturdays. Yeah, Greek Street in Soho is Wednesdays. And if somebody wants an individual class, they are charged for, but they can be held anytime that somebody wants.
You can bring your own knives.
Yeah, absolutely. We want you to bring your own knife so you can see how to sharpen the knife you've got.
I just wanted to go back to your point in the beginning when you were talking about the different layers of steel, and obviously some knives, they say, oh, this is 5, 6 layers of steel, and obviously it's more money. But I just wanted to...
The more layers you have, the easier the sharpening.
Okay.
But it's the core material that's in the middle that's holding the edge. So if I had a powder steel with 256 layers like that one there, it would stay sharp longer than this single layer, because the core material here is harder. But if the core material was the same, then this would probably lose its edge probably 3 or 4 times faster, but it'll be 3 or 4 times easier to sharpen. And in the house, you probably want something that's easier to sharpen, because rather than something that stays sharp for a very long period of time, unless you're going to bring it into us to sharpen.
So if you're a professional chef working at home, what would you recommend for, like, because I know obviously it's a balance between layers and the core, what would you recommend?
Normally 3 layers is the minimum, and the core, if your sharpening isn't very good, then something with maybe 33 or 35 layers, like the Shun. Or maybe a handmade one, which would be cheaper than the Shun machine-made one, because it's not a big brand.
But then the handmade ones, they rust and you have to get
No,
that.
no, you can get stainless ones.
You get the stainless steel.
Yeah, you can get the same as the Shun, the same material as the Shun, but just made by hand rather than by machine.
Right.
So the blade will probably keep its edge slightly longer, it'll probably be slightly thinner, so it'll be a bit sharper.
And how many knives do you think you need as a home cook?
You need one comfortable chef knife.
Okay.
So for some people it's a 21, for some people it's 18 centimeter blade.
Yeah.
And then you need one small knife, probably for peeling and paring, or a utility knife.
Yeah.
And you need one thin long blade for filleting and for carving and stuff like that. Maybe one bread knife.
Bones, like going through like knuckles and chopping up a chicken.
Cleaver.
A cleaver.
A cheap cleaver. A really good cheap cleaver will probably set you back about 35, 40 pounds. And that'll be fine.
So it's the weight of the cleaver that's just going through it.
Otherwise you just break the knife.
Yeah.
You just chip it. It's like trying to cut something very, very rigid and hard, as well as something really very, very soft. You just can't have the same edge. I mean, it's just not possible.
Jay, would you mind saying something about tempering?
Sure.
I've never understood why repeated heating and cooling makes something better.
Okay, when you heat metal up, or heat anything up, first you have something which is solid. You heat it so the energy is transferring from the fire to the material. So the molecules there are starting to move, and they start going further and further apart. So as they go further and further apart, first that material from solid goes to soft, then it goes to malleable, so you can shape it. If you continue applying heat to it, it will turn into a liquid. If you're still applying heat to it, it will turn into a gas and go away, right? Because the molecules are so far away from each other. If you can get something to the point of extreme malleability before it starts to turn into a liquid, and then you dunk it into, so there's my steel where it starts off. There's my steel crystals when they've gone to a point where they're just about to turn into a liquid. And I dunk it into cold water or oil, they'll come together really fast. As they come together really fast, they collide, and anything which is uneven will turn into a more even shape, and it will go closer and closer together. So the further away I can get those steel crystals, the faster I can get them to come to, the faster they come close together, so the blades become harder.
Sort of compressing a crystalline structure.
Yeah, and it'll get close together. Now carbon has one of the highest burning points, and so if something has high carbon in it, it will be able to get to a higher temperature before you bring it together, which is why carbon steel blades are harder. And then normally you sharpen the blade up at that point, and then you re-temper it, because at the initial point of tempering, the blade will be so hard that it may be brittle. So you need to bring the hardness down a bit. So the first time you might take it to 1050 degrees, the second time you might take it to 750 or 800. Depends on the maker and depending on what you're making. Yeah?
How do you sharpen a serrated?
You have to do each individual serration.
Which can be done.
Which we do.
Yeah.
We do. We use a special file, and we can sharpen serrated blades if they're worth sharpening. With so many serrated blades, they're not made out of a continuous serration, but they're made out of saw teeth. If it's saw teeth, you know, it's honestly not worth bothering.
What about bread knife?
Yeah, that's what I mean. But there are two types. There are ones that have the sort of serrations like that. There are ones that have the serration like a kai, which is a continuous serration like that. And then there are ones that are like a saw. The ones that are like a saw aren't worth doing. The other ones are.
There was the Rolls razor, of course, that had a stone that flapped back and forth across.
Yes. And there are electric ones that do it as well. There are electric sharpeners that they claim to sharpen. I think what they do is they just sharpen one side of the blade. So eventually your serrations disappear. But it will take a long time. So if you're buying a £50 knife, it may well be worth just doing that. Yeah? Any other questions?
What do you think of the Robert Walsh sharpener for home use? An ordinary domestic cook.
I don't like anything which has abrasives sitting at an angle over which you don't have any control. And anything which has grooves in it, I don't like at all because it leaves a really rough edge. I want something which has got water in it all the time, so that it cools. As you rub steel against any abrasive surface, you create heat. Right? That heat makes the blade softer. The softer and softer the blade is getting, the more and more it's like trying to sharpen plasticine. Right? All the molecules are moving around. You want something cooling to stop it, and also you want something that creates like a liquid, so that slides easily on the surface. So I know that there's lots of different ones, and if something works for you, then fine, use it. You know, but for me personally, I won't use anything except for stones and wheels that have water in them. My wife doesn't like to use this, so she uses mostly a ceramic knife, but occasionally she needs her own steel knife, so she sharpens it on a water wheel, and it works fine.
Okay, I'm in one of your shops and I'm looking at two santoku. They're the same length, and I like the handles on both of them. And one costs £300 and one costs £1,000. Why would I consider buying the more expensive one? If I
okay, first of all, it's about diminishing returns. Okay, so if I pay £5 for something and I get an X amount of functionality from the blade, if I pay £10, I'll probably get 2X. I paid double the money. But if I pay 500, I'm not going to get 50X. I'm probably going to get 15X. Right? So as it goes past, as you pay more and more money, you have to pay lots and lots and lots of more money to get that tiny little bit of extra performance out of something. So between £300 and £1,000, I'd say that the increase in performance is probably going to be 8 to 10%. Right? Longer at keeping its edge, easier to sharpen. Now, that's fundamentally the difference between the two blades, is that one is going to stay sharper longer. But how much longer is not dependent on the price. You know, as it gets more and more expensive. And the difference between £1,000 and £5,000, I would doubt very much you could tell the difference. The difference is in, oh, that's it, that's the one. I've got it in my hand, and that's the one. I go into a shop, okay, like I go into Marks and Spencer's, and I buy a jacket. Chances are it's probably made, it's an Italian make, it's probably made by GFT. GFT also makes Armani. On the same machines, the same cloth, just a different colour. But you know when you put that Armani one on, oh yeah, it feels good. Right? It feels good. Even if it's exactly the same, it feels good because you paid more money for it. All right? You just feel more confident in it. If that makes a difference, then that's the difference. You may also want to buy a knife made by a particular maker. You know, like for example, I always wanted an Azai knife. Now, Azai-san is dead. He died about 3-4 years ago. And so his knives are actually increasing in value now. But collectors are buying Azai knives for 2-3 times the money they paid for them. So it may be something you want to buy from a particular maker. But in general, it's just about the feel. You hold something in your hand and you know it's at home. You know, and that's the difference.
The weight and
the weight, the balance, the feel, the fact that it's more money. It's everything. It's everything put together. You know, there's no way of saying, yeah, £1,000 knife is definitely going to stay sharper than a £50 knife. It should, it probably will, if the steel's right, everything else is right. If you're not buying a brand, it will. But the most important thing is the feel. You know, it's.
Can I ask a stupid question about how, in terms of storing them, do you think on a magnetic grip or?
Fine.
There's no special.
As long as the edge isn't going into a wooden block where you're putting it out where it's cutting the wood each time.
Yeah.
It's fine. So magnetic strip, it should always be lifted out that way, not that way. Oh. Unless you've got a wooden strip, which is magnetic. Blocks should always be magnetic on the sides, so you can just stick the blades on rather than going in and out or something.
Yeah.
Or have knife covers. You can buy knife shields quite inexpensively, which you can put the knife in the drawer.
Or your lovely case.
Or cases like that, yeah. We have a series of cases, like nylon ones that start at like 10-12 pounds,
okay.
And they go right through to hand-stitched, handmade sort of buffalo hide.
Does it matter when you're sharpening your knife? Like I've seen other people do methods where they take the knife flat in front of you and sort of do motions like that. Does it matter which way you do it?
So if the blade edge is flat, right, I want to just do that. But if I do that, for example, at the moment this knife is touching here and here. As soon as I do this, the front has come off the surface. If I just kept on doing that in one direction, I'd wear this down before this touched the surface, and then I'd end up with a flat blade. So I go round in a circle. But the actual methods themselves, if I was in America, I'm sharpening like that, like I'm cutting a bit of salmon. If I'm in Scandinavia, I'm sharpening in a circle like that. If I'm in Germany, I'm sharpening in a figure of 8. If I'm in Japan, I'm doing that. Each country says theirs is the only way right. They're all right. As long as I get an even angle all the way along on the edge on a fine stone, and it's even all the way along, they're all
Because
right.
you're doing one motion, because I've seen other people do where they do a little bit on one end, then the middle.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I'm used to doing it. Normally I would say you do it in 3 sections. It's just I'm used to it. So I know when my blade needs is turning over, it's just for speed.
I just wondered if one was better or
No.
the other, so.
No,
okay.
they're all the same. It's getting the angle even and keeping it even. That's the most important thing. Sorry? Yeah, I'll start.
Some people say that the key with knife sharpening is little but often, but you were talking about knives that only need to be sharpened once or twice a year. That seems counterintuitive.
You might want to maintain it on a newspaper or a leather strop.
Oh, a strop.
Yeah, but you won't need regrinding.
Right. Oh, you're talking about a serious grind.
Proper sharpener.
Gotcha.
In a domestic kitchen, how often would you recommend, like once a month, to sharpen your knives?
This knife, about once every 2 to 3 months. This one, about every 4 months or so. This one, about the same. This one, about twice a year. This one, about once a year.
And never with the other one. With the tiny one.
This one, every time I use it.
Oh.
Because this, single stroke, it'll shave. It's like a razor blade. Because you know when you're gutting an eel, it wants to be live.
Oh, so you rarely gut an eel then?
I do when I'm in Japan. I don't here because we can't really buy that many live eels. And you can't buy freshwater eels that are that small here. I don't like very long
You never
eels.
use the knife then, really?
Yeah, I do. I mean, this is something I made 20 years ago, you know, when I worked in Japan for 10 years making knives. And I had like 100 odd knives like this that are sitting in the drawer, which I'm not allowed to sell, because you can't sell your knives till the master says that you can. And 10 years wasn't enough for him to say I could, so they're just sitting there in the drawer. I think they're as good as anything I can sell.
Do people buy knives for investment value? I mean, you said that this particular master died and so on, and so...
No, people don't.
Sorry?
People don't.
They don't?
They buy them because they like them. It just happens to be luck that...
Right.
I mean, Kobayashi, today the Kobayashi knives that we sold 15 years ago for £3,000–4,000 are fetching up to £50,000 or £60,000 in America. But that just happens to be luck. I mean, it just happens to be 2 or 3 people who decided they were going to pay the money.
Even if they've been used a lot?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know what they were like. I just heard about them. You know, but it's like anything. You know, somebody decided they want something, and they can't have it, so they wanted more, and they just want it, and people will pay.
So it's no particular reflection on the quality. They presume it's good quality, but it's more a matter of the name, the stamp of the artist.
Exactly. And somebody willing to buy it because that's what they want.
Supply and demand.
Yeah.
Someone has paid several £1 million for a self-destructive work of art, and it was worth more after it had destroyed itself.
More than £2.5 million bottle of wine.
I noticed you bought some of the pants.
Yeah, I'm going to show you those. So, just to get onto the cast iron, which is really popular, tends to be very heavy. So, a Japanese company called Uniloi has produced the world's lightest cast iron.
Sorry,
Uniloi.
Uniloi.
They're the world's lightest cast iron pans and pots. Also, the lids sit on the side so that you don't have to worry about where to put it. And if you feel the weight of that, it's way lighter than any cast iron pan. But it has the same heat retention and the same ability to heat evenly across the surface as, say, we sell another make, we sell stove, and that's about the same as stove.
Does it work with induction?
It works on induction, it works on gas, it works on electric, it works on what do they call them? They have a different grade of infrared. So that's cast iron. The world's first and only carbon fiber pans. They hold the heat roughly 4 times longer than cast iron. Also, infrared is held inside, so everything stays very, very moist. And the lids have a twist on them so you can let the air out or not. So you don't, it's almost, because the finishing is less than 0.01 of a mil in finish, it almost acts like a pressure cooker without being a pressure cooker.
So is that good for cooking rice, sushi rice?
It's good for everything.
Yeah.
It's actually created from one solid block of carbon fiber and then being turned by hand by 2 masters. We used to turn things in wood before. And they are probably about the most expensive of the pots that we sell.
How much are they?
This particular one's about £500, and the other one's like £1,000, £900. Yeah, but let people go out and pay, Richard, people go out and pay £1,000 for a Mauviel. For a Mauviel copper one. Like people will pay £1,000 for a Mauviel copper one, or people will pay £900 or £600 for a best clad, all clad from America. You know, so it's about how much you cook and what you like in the kitchen. This is oven to table as well, and it looks quite good.
Too scared to handle it. Well, it's freak if they drop it.
You can handle it, it's like anything, you know, it's like a...
We can't afford it. No, they're absolutely.
Then we have a series of... We then have a series of pressed iron that started like £20 for a wok or bag. Pressed iron. This one I think is £29.
So what is the advantage of pressed iron?
Well, pressed iron won't hold the heat as long as cast iron, but it does have a very even distribution of.
Yeah. Will the finish come off a pan like that where the cooking?
No, the finish won't, because you have to season these.
Okay.
The spots on their own is something from having too much surface area for these to stick to. It's not non-stick. You need to season it.
Okay.
And then we have various grades of these things, which are slightly heavier, slightly lighter, and slightly wider. And we have woks and pans and pots and all sorts of stuff in these ranges. These are French. These are 3-ply. We do have separate handles for them. Okay. We have separate handles that just click on and off on these things, so they're ready for storage. And this is 3-ply that goes not just to the bottom, but goes to the sides, so the heat up quite quickly as well. Again, there's about 35 different models of these things, from pans and pots and all sorts of stuff. And this is a 5-ply, like the American all-clad. It's not just 5-ply at the bottom, it's 5-ply all the way along. So the heat distribution is very, very even. And also the end is the pour is very, very clean. So you don't get any splashing out.
What brand is that?
Crystal.
It is Crystal. I thought so from the handles. I have some Crystal. It is great.
Yeah, it's one of the best. Yeah, it's one of the oldest and the best of the French manufacturers. The manufacturing is quite small, and so they don't have a lot of places they sell it. But we have the full range of Crystal, everything.
At all your stores?
Baker Street at the moment, and that's why we're opening a new shop. We have a small amount in all the stores, but the full collection will be in the new shop. We just don't have the space to put all the pots and pans we want to sell. Also, it's fat-free cooking. Fat-free cooking on this one, so you don't need any butter or oil to cook. So, just to show you the difference.
See how little pressure Jay has to apply.
I know, I was just watching that.
I'm not applying pressure, because if I apply pressure, it's going to break the cells. If I break the cells, I'm going to cry. I'm crying, that means my sugar and my acid have gone into the air rather than into the food itself. So here, I've got virtually nothing. From this here, I'm going to suffer some.